Hey there, it's Mike Langford. Welcome to another episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. This week on the show, I'm joined by Jay Zigmont, founder and CEO of Childfree Wealth, for a conversation about the intricacies of providing comprehensive financial advice to child-free clients. Now, as you'll hear Jay outline early in this conversation, we aren't talking about clients who are empty nesters or young clients who haven't started their families yet. We're talking about a very significant population of adults who do not have children and do not intend to have children. And as you're about to learn, child-free folks have a lot of needs that are not being met by traditional financial planning methods that were mostly designed to serve the financial life cycle of people with children. This is truly an eye-opening conversation. I think you're going to get a lot out of it. Okay, before we get started, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Amazon, the YouTubes, or wherever you like to get your podcast jam on. And if you have a question or a suggestion for a topic or a guest for the show, hit me up. I'm basically at Mike Langford everywhere on the internet, or you can just shoot us an email, podcast@finservmarketing.com. Okay, let's get to the conversation with Jay Zigmont. Well, Dr. Jay Zigmont, welcome to the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. So wonderful to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So as I said, us amazing looking bald dudes got to get together occasionally and have some fun conversations. So you're looking dapper. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to send the hair and makeup crew, but you didn't. I just saying.
You know what's so funny? I might be one of the few guys who actually has a pancake that I keep in my office because occasionally I get too shiny and I'm not, it's just clear, right? And I will take off a little bit of because I get the shine. And by the way, if you're listening to this, you should go over and watch the video feed because this is, again, the handsome overwhelm here. We're all face, baby. So, but yeah, you got to occasionally tap it down. Funny quick story before we launch anything. So both of my kids play basketball. And after the games, the next day they review game film. So they actually do film all these high school and middle school basketball games. And one time I was sitting basically with the camera behind me. I didn't realize this. So the next day they're doing film and all the boys are like, look at that dude's head. It's so shiny. My son's like, yeah, it's my dad's head. So awesome.
I had a client the other day ask me, how do you keep your head shaved so well? I mean, what's your, I'm like, a razor?
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, exactly. It's so funny. Things you never, like when you were a little kid, you never envisioned that someday you'd be like a couple times a week shaving the top of the dome, but it happens anyway. Well, we both got good heads for it. So at least there's that, right? We got the luck. So anyways, we didn't get on the show to talk about bald stuff, even though we probably could rip on that for hours. We're going to dive into child-free financial advice or financial advice for child-free Americans and beyond probably. But the thing I want to kick things off with is something I think might just blow our listeners and viewers' minds a little bit. During our prep call, you mentioned that 25% of American adults are child-free or somewhere close to that. And to me, it's like, that's a huge number, but once you said it, I was like, you know what? I think you're right. I started thinking through like my network of human beings, of adults. I'm like, oh, brother-in-laws and best friend and this and that. Like, hey, a lot of these folks are child-free. So I guess it's not so surprising, but I just had never given it much thought. So I wonder if you wouldn't mind kind of breaking that stat down for us a bit, because I'm sure there is a variety of reasons why folks are child-free. And I think it's an important concept for the audience to understand.
Yeah, and first let's start with the definition. So when I
Sure.
say child-free, I mean people who don't have kids and aren't planning to have kids ever. I
Mhm.
don't mean like the kids are gone for a weekend or, they're out of, empty nest or I don't
Yeah.
have kids yet. And you'll actually see that in social media, like, oh, I'm a dink, dual income, no kids. Like, are you a dink forever or a
Right.
dinky, which is no kids yet? So
Yeah.
what I'm really talking about is people like never going to have kids. So that changes the picture. And there was a study out of Michigan that looked at this, and we don't have great across the U.S., but Michigan's pretty representative of the U.S. And they found just about 20% of adults were child-free by choice, and about another 5% were childless not by choice. So you put those two together, you end up with about 25% of people never going to have kids. For comparison, that same study found that just about 8% of adults were of the LGBTQ plus community. And there's
Okay.
huge overlap between the communities. But if I said to people out there, okay, the child free community is 3 times the size of the LGBTQ plus community, they don't believe me. They're like,
Hmm.
there's no way it's that big. No, it is. It's just when I started researching this, I didn't realize how big it was. I didn't realize there were other folks out there. It's not well talked about. It's not well researched. It's an area that represents a large population, but it's not like a loud set of the population, if we call it that.
Yeah. You know what's really interesting? When you were sharing that to me, the first thing that popped into my mind was a stat that I'd heard, and this is going on like 20 years ago, back when I was in grad school. And I saw a stat that said something around like only about a third of Americans have a college degree, like a bachelor's degree and above. And I read that and I'm like, that's pretty interesting. And the friend of mine who heard me say that goes, that's BS. There's no way it's that low. And I'm like, well, think about everybody we know, right? Everybody we know and hang out with has a college degree because that's our network of human beings. But think about the person that you pumped your gas, or you just go down the list of things. Like most likely those folks either didn't need college for what they're doing or just didn't get it. And that's part of the reason why they're doing what they're doing and not something different. But it was kind of an aha moment. And this, I think it's a similar thing to what you're talking about here. Once you start to think about it, like, yeah, I know a lot of people who don't have children. I'd never asked them, like, why don't they have children? They could be by choice, could be they just are unable to have children, or like you said, circumstance, just life path took them down a road and they got to an age like, well, I'm past kid of years and I don't have kids. It's amazing.
Yeah, and if you look at the reasons why people don't have children, so there is a percentage, not they'd like to, but for whatever reason, medical reasons or life. I mean, my wife and I, she has a 50-50 chance of dying if she gets pregnant. Like
Hmm.
that kind of made our choice.
Yeah.
We still use the term child free. Everybody has different things, but I actually asked folks, why do you choose to be child free?
Hmm.
And what I found was over half the folks I talked to said more than one reason. So like they had a lot of thought behind it. Some was finance, and I just don't want to have kids. But it got really interesting because they had people like because of politics, because of the environment, because of medical issues or past traumas, or all of these really well thought out reasons. And what you find is as you dive into this, the people that are child free by choice put a lot of thought into that choice. In some cases, it's more thought than people who, were like, oh, I'm just gonna have kids.
Right.
Because it's a default choice.
Yeah.
Like the standard life script says you go to school, you get married, you have kids, it's the American dream,
Yeah.
the house, the 2.5 kids, white picket fence, a dog. Like that's all just like the standard plan. We call it the standard life script. Well, the people that are choosing this child-free life are choosing intentionally. And I get people that, oh, well, they'll change their mind. I hate that. But well, they say it.
Yeah.
And I go, well, for my first book, The Push to Child Free Wealth, I had people at 21 getting sterilized. Like, I mean,
Interesting.
this is not like, hey, I might have, no, like, that's it. We're done. And once you start realizing that, you go, all right. So if 25% of the US child free and all the data says the younger generations more and more are choosing child free, well, then why in the world? And as far as I know, I'm the only financial planning firm dedicated to serving them. Why is there only one firm
Yeah.
dedicated to serving them when it's 25% of the US?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I truly, when your PR rep reached out to say, hey, Jay would be a good fit for your show. I replied back asking, first of all, our audience is financial advisors and wealth management executives. It sounds like Jay might want to be talking to a more retail audience, but I would love to have Jay on the show because I have never met an advisor who is exclusively focusing on or focusing, by the way, at all, or having any type of like clearly delineated services articulated to serve this type of client. Like I want to learn about this, and I think our audience wants to learn about it as well. So I'm super thrilled that you agreed to come on the show. Really appreciate
Well,
it.
and I spend half my time talking to child free folks about their finance, and the other half talking to financial people about child free folks because it's such a big issue.
Sure.
Yeah. I've met folks. There are people that are helping child free folks, some intentionally, some not. A lot of people that are helping with people like alternative lifestyles. So I had
Mm,
somebody that focused on people to do tiny houses,
mm,
tiny house plus child free. they go together somewhat. If you have 3 kids in a tiny house, I'm not sure how you do that. There are people that serve the crossover populations, and that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
I did an article for Kitsis on child-free financial planning, and before that, I went through everything in Kitsis, and there's nothing.
Yeah.
And any financial topic for a financial planner, there's something on Kitsis for
Yeah.
and there is an article about there wasn't.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how can it be that it doesn't exist? People joke about there's nothing new in finance, and they're probably right. But I'm like, I think I found a group that it's kind of not there.
I think I actually do think you're right because it's again to your point. Like you think about the average American, in the financial planning persona, if you want to call it that, for your client, it's almost always married couple with descendants of some sort. So, what's really interesting? I was at a conference recently, actually last week here in Austin, Texas, where Regina Krodi-Alam, had to make sure I pronounce her last name correctly. She's the founder emeritus of Focus Financial, very large firm, and now the co-CEO of E3 Tech. So I want to get her props on this. But she was on a panel, and one of the things she said, kind of in jest, if you will, she was kind of joking around with the other panelists, is she says, women are not a segment. Any group that makes up over half of the population is not a segment, right? And it got a little bit of a laugh at first from everybody. And then, kind of people sort of shifted in their seats. You could realize like advisors in the audience were like, oh, shoot, we kind of are thinking of women as a marketing segment. But only recently, and I mean this, like in the last couple of years, frankly, have financial firms started to wake up to the fact that women clients may have some specific needs. Now, they're not all going to be the same. You can't paint them as one big brush because they are half the population, but they might have some different needs and expectations for the services that are being delivered to them from their advisor that are a little bit different. So it struck me in preparing this conversation that could be also true. Like, even though it's 25% at least of the population are child free, well, they're not all going to be the same, but there might be some kind of unique needs. So what are some of the things that you see that are like just unique needs that might separate a child-free person or couple from the average client persona?
By the way, you're right on. I had actually heard it at a DFA webinar. They're like, hey, women can't be a niche. And I'm like, okay, cool. By the way, we'll all fight a niche or niche, but that's a separate discussion. But the thing is, when people pick a group to focus on,
Yeah.
whatever you're going to call it, my question is always, are they really different? And
Mm.
child-free folks are one of those where the financial planning is completely different. So the way I look at it, I'll walk through this quick from the backwards forward.
Yeah.
If we start with child-free folks, 95, 99% of the people I work with want to die with zero. They don't want to pass the money to the next generation. So
Okay.
if you're trying to die with zero, I have to actually create a plan where your net worth comes down. Interestingly enough, the die with zero model actually builds a natural conflict of interest with AUM model because the AUM model is a percentage base. They want the advisors want the percentage to go up.
Yeah.
The clients want their net worth to go down. There's a conflict in there that actually does matter. And there's ways to work around it, but I'm just calling that out. It's part of the reason why we use flat fee. So they want to die with zero. They need to figure out their long-term care plan. Now, by the way, everybody does, but child-free folks are a little more understanding of it. Also, there's huge estate planning issues, which is like, who's going to make the medical financial decisions when you don't have next of kin? That's the one I've been working for 2 years, and I'm hoping to launch a solution later this year on that. But huge problem.
Yeah.
Then we find out child-free folks really don't want to retire. Rather than doing what they call FIRE, they do what we call FILE, financial independence, live early. They're more like cutting back on work or choosing to follow their passion and do a cupcake business or something. That's part of it. They also, the way we say it, have a life of child-free wealth. Meaning they have time, money, and freedom to do what they enjoy. So my child-free folks, I'll get on a meeting with them like, oh yeah, I'm moving to Australia. And I'm like, where did that come from? They're like, oh, well, I've just decided. And that's normal for them, where they're constantly making these shifts.
Yeah.
And we start pulling it apart deeper. We find out 32.1% of child-free folks will never marry. So we're talking about a much larger population that are single with no kids. We call those soloists. For the couples, they embrace what we call a garter in the rows, where one's providing support and one's growing. You see all of these changes, and then we can keep pulling it back. Life insurance, not a big deal for child-free folks. Disability insurance is a big deal. And all of these assumptions that are built into the software, the systems break.
Yeah.
So when I go into, I use Right Capital for my financial planning, and I got to give them credit. They just recently started allowing couples to be in there but not married. Well, not all financial planning software does that. So that's kind of like part of like, eh, I mean, we're talking about parents. 2.5% of them will never be married. So I mean, most of the child free, 32% of child free folks will never marry. They might be in a couple, might be in a group. The software
Yeah.
doesn't do that. Well, then I go into the software. Well, everything's based around Monte Carlo. Well, Monte Carlo is all based on you not running out of money.
Right.
So if it's 100% success in a Monte Carlo, that's 100% failure with my child-free folks. And what happens is, and this is where I'm going to argue the difference between the child-free population and serving women in particular. You're right. Women as a broad brush, I probably am not going to get a lot of the similarities. Child-free as a niche, all of these assumptions are very, very similar. We actually have a program we call the 8 No Baby Steps. And for those who have followed the Dave Ramsey 7 Baby Steps, we have the inverse.
Hey, no.
And
Like,
like
that's
we
great.
go from the first three, getting out of debt and budget, that's all the same for everybody. But then like buying a house, well, for child free folks, buying a house is a choice, not a requirement. All of these things that it starts changing. And once you see it, it's hard to go, oh, this is the same as everything else. It's actually different. And my way of looking at it, now I serve child free folks, so I'm biased. If you look at two parents' financial plans, they're very similar. The
Yeah.
numbers change, the speed changes, but the plan itself is very linear. Child free folks, no two plans are the same.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part. But there's these assumptions that change, these things with Die with Zero, the long term care, all that changes all of the base assumptions. And I had a large firm explain to me that they couldn't do Die with Zero with their clients. They thought it's against their fiduciary duty.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, if your client is saying this is their goal, you need to figure
Right.
out how to get there. But they're like, but I can't. My compliance won't let me. I'm like, well, that's a different problem.
Right.
And like, and the software won't let me. And all. I'm like, that's all this stuff is built into the system. We do some intergenerational stuff. What we do though is we work with people's parents. We don't work with their kids. They don't have them.
Yeah.
But like, hey, are your parents going to be okay? Like,
Yeah.
and it just starts changing everything. And once you see that, I see then other people in niche like, oh, I'm serving engineers. I'm like, look, two engineers' financial plans are not that far apart. And the difference between an
Yeah.
engineer and a scientist and the financial plan, it's a marketing thing.
Sure.
Well, for child-free folks, it's actually a different specialty. The way we say it
Yeah.
is we do life and financial planning because if I don't plan for their life, I can make a financial plan that doesn't even get them there. And our child-free folks get to a point where like, hey, I've hit all my goals. What do I do next? We call it the child-free midlife crisis. Where am I going? And we're like, I don't know. Let's figure that out. And that's different.
I it's very rare that I have a guest on who just like gets me going like, oh my God, I never thought about that. Oh, that is really fascinating. Oh, that it is really interesting. Because again, well, I am not a child-free human. So like and I obviously grew up in a family where I was a child. So but there's so many people close to me in my life who are child-free and are, well into their adult years. They were not going to have children. And I'm just like, oh, this is so fascinating. Their life is so different than mine. And my wife and I talk about it, right? Like about how different, like she's got 3 of her 4 brothers are child free. My sister's child free. My best friend and his wife are child free. So, and occasionally you think about like, oh, well, their life's different. They don't have kids, right? Like, or whatever. But you don't think about the other components of it. But you hit on a couple of things. One was something I think sometimes us child full, like
Parents.
the parents, right? People think of like you get a little envious. Like, so a friend of mine, he and his wife, when the pandemic was going, said, you know what? There's no reason for us to stay living here in Austin, whatever. They moved to Tulum and just like lived there for a while and worked from the house and just live that life, right? I was like, you brought that up, like that's pretty badass, right? But you can't necessarily do that as easily when you have school age kids, right? You can't just pull up and decide. I mean, you technically can, but you don't. But the other thing you were just mentioning is the Die with Zero part and the potential for advisors feeling challenged, right, by that. And I wonder if we can unpack that a little bit more. And
Mhm.
the reason why I think that's important, as you mentioned, some advisors might feel it's a breach of their fiduciary duty, or they might feel that it's a compliance is going to get on their business about it. But I'm thinking more logistical from the financial perspective of this, right? Because I can't control when I'm going to die, right? The two great risks in financial planning are is dying too early, life insurance for that, or living too long, right? And to some extent, long-term care can help with that. But like running out of money when you're 95 and you're like, I never thought I'd live to 95, and here I am, right? Is kind of a bummer. How do you, as a financial advisor and financial planner, cover that, right? Because I think that's probably where people, the traditional financial planners, are their brains get a squirrely a little bit. Like, how do I handle like that? Because I don't want
Yep.
my client to run out of money.
Yeah, and part of it is you have to understand their goals. So
Mm,
I actually spend more time talking to my clients about spending money than saving money.
okay.
And this is one of those challenges. You get clients in their 30s, 40s with a few $1,000,000. As long as they don't do anything silly, they're going to die with a lot of money. It's just
Hmm.
kind of how it works. And it's
Yeah.
compounding. And I had somebody reach out to me, 60 something, 10 million plus, and they're like, I'm going to run out of money. I'm like, dude, you're not. Like, there's no way. I'm looking at what you're spending, not even close. So I actually spend my time talking to them about, okay, well, let's travel more, let's give more, let's do this. And what you realize is there's this assumption that our number one goal as financial planners is to keep running out of money.
Mm,
Now, by the way, when I say die with zero, I don't mean literally we're going to bounce the last
yeah.
check, but like that's a figurative. So what we do is first thing is we figure out a plan for long-term care. Our goal with our clients is by mid 40s to have a plan for long-term care. Now that I just was talking to somebody else about long-term care this morning, and she sells it. She's like, people don't usually talk to me about long-term care until their 50s at least, and not 60s. And I'm like, no, we put a plan in place, either out of pocket, long-term care insurance, something
Yeah.
for long-term care in the mid 40s. 50 if I get late. So we do that. We put off Social Security till 70, and then we put a little cash cushion. So put aside a little money. That's what you're going to die with. That's what
Yeah.
goes to the way I say it is my nephews get what's left over. If they get 10,000 or $100,000, that's fine. If they get $1 million, I made a mistake because I could have improved their life earlier. Like they need the money now when they're kids, not when I'm 90 and they're
Yeah.
whatever 50 something. That's the difference. And if you really want to die with zero, that's the case for annuities.
Yeah.
So we're a fee only. We don't sell any products, don't sell any annuities. But I've been looking at an annuity product lately that not only has a guaranteed income, but it comes with a health activated multiplier. And what it is if you have a long term care issue, it doubles the amount you get for 5 years. So I get guaranteed income and I have long term care, and I can actually die with zero.
Yeah.
There are ways to do it. And that's where people are like, oh, I never thought about that. I'm like, if you search for the solution, you'll find it. But
Right.
everything in the CFP literature puts in one way. Like I had fun with this when I was working on my second book. I was doing some research on the CFP literature, and I looked at the life cycles. All of them had kids. All of them had pre-post. All of them had, even like the 7-step financial planning process files. And it's just we've been trained. You gotta grow the nest egg. You gotta pass it on. You gotta do all this stuff, and it really messes with people's brains when you're like, no, they'll be fine. We make a safety net.
Yeah.
Then we set a guardrail for how much they can spend. We can work that through. Yes, you need to do ongoing planning. Like I can't like set a child-free person in their plan and go, cool, you'll be fine in 40 years. No, we're doing ongoing regular planning. We're working this through. Oh, the market's up, the market's down, your investments are up or down. You decided to move to Tulum. All right, that's gonna change your plan. But that can be dynamic.
For
We
sure.
don't have to let the Monte Carlo lead it.
Yeah, I love it. And by the way, if you have like links for like you were mentioning the annuity product or whatever, you're like and it doesn't sound like you have any affiliation or whatever. We'll
Nope.
absolutely link that stuff up in the show notes. So I'll get some of this stuff from you afterwards. So if anybody's curious, like, oh, I want to hear about that, then my clients are starting to get interested in that stuff. Um, let's do a little more debunking. And you've touched on a couple of things before, but one of the things I loved about our first conversation that we had on the prep call was, um, you were quick to kind of like, as I would just kind of like ideate, you're like, whap, you're like just hit me with stuff. And I loved it actually because I love that type. It was, I don't want to call it a debate because it wasn't a debate, but it was really interesting. I'm like, oh man, I'm learning something like very quickly here just because of assumptions, right? I'm rolling with assumptions based on my own life experience. And I think many advisors are doing the same thing. So the first thing, and I have to admit, I say this a lot and I think about it a lot. And it's the who is going to take care of these people when they're old, right? Uh,
Oh,
Because I got to tell you, I've got two kids. They're awesome kids. I fully expect them both to be capable of making good decisions for me and my wife should we lose the capability of making decisions on our own, right? We've had experiences in our family already where the siblings have had to make decisions for the elder parents and the grandparents and so forth. So I've seen the children make good decision for their elders. But I got to imagine for financial advisors and anybody listening to this one is like, who the heck is going to make their decisions? Who's going to be the
yeah.
one that's there? So how do you respond to that? Like, how does that conversation go?
Yeah, I have a love-hate thing with this question. And what I hate is that it implies a lot of stuff. You're
Okay.
implying your kids are going to take care of you. And so here's the actual numbers on this. So the US Census looked at childless adults over 55 and said what percentage get any financial support from their family? And the answer was 2.5%. So that's like nothing. Okay, let's just be
Yeah.
real. In the same census study, they looked at parents over 55. They found 1.5% got any support from their family financially. So, for all the parents out there thinking your kids are going to take care of you financially, no.
Yeah.
Now, the question on who's going to make decisions is the one that's kept me up for 2 years. Like, I've lost a lot of sleep. I've talked to like every company I could find, everybody I could find to try to figure out solutions for who is the medical power of attorney, financial power of attorney, and executor for people that don't have next of kin. If you're in California or Arizona, you can get a professional fiduciary to do it. If you're in Georgia, there's one attorney that does it. Trust companies may do it, but only if you got like 10, 15, 20 million in
Yeah.
assets. And even most of them won't do the medical. And it's one I've been working on. I've got a project we're working on. Hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have a solution. We're partnering with a trust company. So we'll be able to be power of attorney for child free folks. And I jokingly say, but it's true that my company is going to bury me. Bree's my right hand, and Bree's going to give me a Viking funeral. Okay, she's already got a book on it. You know, she's
That's
she's already good
awesome.
at archery. Pure Viking funeral. No, I mean like that's the question. And the way I
Yeah.
look at it is, my wife and I get in a car crash. Who makes our medical decisions? Who makes our financial decisions? And who lets our dog out? It
Yeah.
sounds silly, but these are like the
No,
important questions.
it's 100% real questions. Everybody thinks about that occasionally at some point in time, especially if you've had experience as an advisor or just as a human, frankly, seeing an old person who has got to the point in their life in which some decisions need to be made for them, right? Or they need assistance getting to the doctor because they can't drive anymore. Like there's all these things. And I think we've all been trained that like, well, a kid or a nephew or somebody's going to do this. So I think this is a really important discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I have clients. I had a client at 29 ask me, "Hey, how do I get a long-term care policy?" And I was like, "Well, you need to wait to 30 because I won't even quote you until you're 30." But I mean, she's at 29 thinking about it, and I've got clients in their 20s, 30s that I'm working on full estate plans, power of attorney, all that. People are like, "Why?" Well, because if you go into the healthcare system, the government system, it all looks for next of kin, and heaven forbid you're a couple not married because now your spouse who you've been with for 10 years is
Yeah.
nobody legally. We have to do all this. And we actually, the trust company we're partnered up with, like actually hired a team of interns for the summer from a law firm to look at the laws to figure out, can we be people's power of attorney? And it varies state by state. Well, now I got child free folks that, like the editor for my book, lived in a different Airbnb each month, all across the country. Well, I don't even know what state she's in. How do I make sure I have documents that cross these states and work
Yeah.
through it, and we can actually make the decisions for her? How do I know where her dog is? Like, it's just a huge issue. So what we're doing is we're going to partner. We've got flat fee ongoing planning with a trust company. So we'll be people's family member. We'll be their person. I was on a podcast and somebody asked, he said his mom was in the nursing home and she's 90 something and she loves chips, but the nurses won't give them to her because of their diet.
Yeah.
He's like, listen, give her the damn chips. I mean, what's it going to do? Shorten her life by a month? Like, she loves chips.
Yeah.
And his question was, well, who's going to get me my chips?
Yeah.
And I'm like, that is probably the best question I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Who's going to get me my chips?
Yeah. Of course, as everybody knows on the show, because this has actually happened multiple times, I'm a food lemming. So we start talking about food, I'm going to be in the mood for the food. So I'll be looking for some sort of chips this weekend. It'll be happening in my it
Right,
is
but you don't want to be in the nursing home going, I have a craving for chips, and you have nobody going to run to the store to grab you a bag, like because the nurse is like, oh, forget it, it's not on your diet.
That's right.
Like,
Just give me my damn chips. What do you care? I mean, like eventually I'm gonna. That might not be the thing that kills me. Just so you know.
well, I,
No.
I think of my grandfather. My grandfather was 80. He had a bypass, this and the other. And the next day, my dad sees him down at the breakfast place that he always went to,
Yep.
eating bacon and eggs. And he's like, Joe, what are you doing? He goes, listen, it took me 80 years to fill up my heart the first time. I don't have 80 more, so I'm good. And I was like,
Boom.
you know?
That's right, dude. I tell you, my father-in-law was the best. He was like a total, like he was always kind of sneaking around and getting treats. I remember this one time we were back when we lived in Boston, and his office was not too far from my office, and he had been told not to eat so many fat foods and yada yada. Yada. And I'm walking around the corner around Boston Common there, and I just he's standing at a hot dog cart getting 2 hot dogs. He sees me. He's like, "Do not tell your mother-in-law." I'm like, "Don't worry, secret safe with me, bro." It's too funny.
Well, and in our aging days, those are
Yeah.
the things that matter to us.
Yes, they do.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's be honest. It doesn't have to be food, but it's whatever.
Yes.
And how do we make sure our wishes are being followed? And when you
It-
don't have a kid, it's an issue.
well, yeah, and you mentioned like can a trust company do it? Can a law firm do it? Everybody thinks about the law firm as, hey, they could be the executor of your will. They could certainly be the ones who help you draft up all those legal documents and so forth. But usually you have to tap some other human being in your life to be your healthcare proxy, as an
Mhm.
example, or to be, because that's a one that's popped into my head recently because my dad and my parents divorced late in life, one of those gray divorces. Suddenly I'm getting like, by the way, Mike, you're the healthcare proxy for me. And oh, this is interesting. I didn't think this was going to be so soon, but suddenly it is, right? But the case you're making is if someone is child free, and let's just say they don't have a vibrant, large, extended family like nieces and nephews and brothers and sisters, what have you, it can get kind of complicated because like I might want to tap a firm. Like, I trust this company who's got my money more than I trust, my neighbor down the hall to do this. Right? So,
Yeah, we have people that are doing like the Golden Girls homes. So like you have 4 or 5 people living together,
yeah,
and it's a mutual support network. I'll take care of you, you take care of me.
sure.
Works fine except for the last person. The last person's screwed. Like,
Damn it.
you know, you're in Texas. So I actually tried this for a client before
Yeah.
because I've been trying to find solutions. I mean, I've been working hard at this, and he's in Texas. We went to every type of law firm we could find. They're happy to be the financial power of attorney. They're happy to be the executor. They won't touch the medical with a 10-foot pole.
That's fascinating.
And I'm like, that doesn't help. Went to a trust company for it. Happy to take the money, won't do the medical part. And I'm like, I need somebody to be my person. And
Yeah.
by the way, if I'm trying to die with zero, that same trust company is going to kick me off because my assets are going down. They
Yeah.
can't get their percentage. So it's like, these are the systematic things that are in there. That it's like, oh, I didn't realize, I look at it as systemic biases or things that are going on. There's also called a pronatalist bias, which is the bias towards having kids. All of these things that are overlooked for child-free folks. And it's like, okay, give me a solution. And the answer is, I don't have one. And that's
Interesting.
the hard part. And I've
Yeah.
gone out to companies like, please build one. And they're
Yeah.
like, I went to a trust company that partners with RIAs specifically for this. And I'm like, hey, they're like, I'm happy to do the financial. Happy to do the executor, won't touch the medical. I'm like,
This is interesting. You know what? God, we can have it like talk for hours on this concept of like how to solve this problem. Because the thing that was just jumping into my mind, and I absolutely understand why they don't want to touch the medical. The liability is off the charts. If I say, yank the chain, yank the cord, or don't yank the cord, I can be screwed either way, right? So that I can see why somebody's like terrified of that notion for somebody who's not a family member or whatever. Even though there might be complete like healthcare proxy information all laid out, like this is what my wishes are. Uh, have you?
but
Go
let's
ahead.
play this out for a second. Hold
Yeah.
on. So people go liability. Yes, absolutely. And you need to have a good relationship. And that's why, by the way, we have to have an ongoing relationship with these clients. I'm
Yes.
not going to, they can't get the power of attorney services without us like being in the middle of their stuff. Okay. Like we have to know what Mike's chips are. Like, I mean, what matters to him.
It's getting
And
worse. I'm so in the mood for chips. Guys.
right. But here's the thing people go on the liability. I'm like, listen, I'm going to be frank with you. If it's a single child free folk and you pull the plug on them, who's going to sue you?
Right. It's true.
I'm just
Who's coming for
now.
you?
By the way,
Yeah, exactly.
there
Yeah,
is
yeah.
liability, but
I'm sure.
I'm
Yeah.
just playing this out to the extreme.
Yeah.
And the other choice is if you don't have that, you end up in an involuntary conservatorship where the government's making decisions for you.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question: do you want a company that you trust, the fiduciary, and somebody to do this role, or do you want the government making decisions for you? I don't care what your political beliefs are. I don't want the government making decisions for you.
100%. Yeah. No kidding. Exactly. Uh, you never know who's going to be in charge at the time when you need it. Have you? This is just a off the cuff just question. Have you thought about the concept of like maybe creating communities of people, like a wider community, right? So you mentioned that the Golden Girl setup. That's cool and interesting, but I'm thinking about something a little more bigger, right? Like, hey, listen,
Mhm.
you're a child-free folk. You are going to want to have somebody who's willing to make some medical decisions on your behalf and kind of contractually be able to do it, almost like a matchmaking. Like let's get this bad boy going. Like you're Jay, you're first in line. In the event if you're still alive and I'm having medical problems, you're making decisions. If you're dead, it goes to Sue, and if Sue's dead, just go. Have you thought about that kind of concept? Because it feels like I thought about it at first. At first, I was going to suggest like maybe this is a role for somebody's church or and that type. But not
Mhm.
everybody's religious, right? Like I'm sure there are some child-free folks who are active in whatever their religion or faith is. But I'm sure there's many who are atheists or agnostic, and all those other options. So I was thinking, well, maybe just a broader community. Have you thought about that as a concept? Is that
Yeah.
something you've pursued?
So we actually just brought on somebody to be our director of community
Hmm.
to build communities. Now, not necessarily for that reason, but part of what we're trying to do is get child-free folks together and be like, oh, there's others like us because
Yeah.
we're all used to being weird because we don't fit everywhere else. I looked at what I originally wanted to do was do a nonprofit to do this. Well, like the AARP for child-free folks, like a nonprofit that could do this, a
Yeah.
foundation. The problem is the laws won't allow that. So that becomes an issue. Now, if we do individuals, the issue is we just pass that liability to an individual. And now this is the question of being a burden and other things. A lot of the LGBTQ communities do have like, hey, I'm going to do this for somebody. I'm going to do this for somebody. I'm going to do this for somebody. Once again, we get to the problem of who's the last person.
Right.
Okay. And you're now taking that on personally. And that's the problem. So one of the things I hear a lot is it's a burden to put on others. I was on a podcast and the host said it this way. He said he wakes up every morning thinking that he killed his mom. And I'm like, what? He's like, look, he had the paperwork, knew what his mom wanted. He pulled the plug. He's
Yeah.
like, you know what you're doing for the child free folks where you can pay a company to do that? I want to do that because I don't want to put that burden on my kids.
Yeah.
And I was like, you're right. I don't want that burden on my friends. I don't want, and the problem is if we build that community, well, the child-free folks, man, they move around like you wouldn't believe. My wife got a job offer. We moved 1,200 miles away, put the mastiffs and the cat in the Prius, and went. By the way, you got to see two mastiffs in the back of a Prius. That's a
I
separate
mean,
discussion.
I'm envisioning this right now. These
Well,
monstrous
like,
dogs. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, like the big old snot coming out, but
Yeah.
but that was no big deal. So if I
Yeah.
built a great community in the state I was in, and I moved 1,200 miles away,
Yeah.
it's a problem. And it's all of these things. So when you go back to that discussion you're having, like, well, can women be a segment? Well, the similarities around women are there, but the child-free population, the similarities are so strong
Yeah.
that I'm like, okay, how do I address all this? And it's all of these factors together.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is I wake up every morning going, oh, that's a different problem. How do I address that? Like,
Right.
I'm like, clients come with stuff like, I've never thought of that. We need,
Have
and it's a problem.
uh, this is a silly question. I know we only have like 15 minutes or so left with each other, but like, have you looked to other countries to see how they're solving these problems? And here's the reason why I'm asking that question. So, uh, my in-laws were in a assisted living facility, and we're very fortunate that they are in an elite, just awesome one, right? And it was created by people who were from Norway, right? But they moved to the United States, and when their parents got older and they were looking for a place for their parents, there was nothing like the quality of care that was in the Norwegian
Mhm.
elder care facilities. And like, we got to do something kick butt like that here in the United States. And so they created this place for them, for not for just for my in-laws, but they
I
created this
also think
place.
they got a lot of money.
I know,
Like,
no, they're not that okay, but you see it and you're just like, everybody deserves this, right? Everybody deserves this type of facility. It's, I mean, the caring, the just a community, everything about it is just exactly what you'd want for your parents and or for yourself or somebody else.
mhm.
But I often hear when I'm listening to and I guess people call me a liberal or whatever when I say these types of things, but I'm listening to the NPR or whatever, and I hear like, oh, in Norway, this is how they handle school, or this is how they handle healthcare, or whatever. Other countries, and someone like, why the heck are we not doing that here in the United States? Have you found models in other countries that are addressing child-free folks and their care and their life planning in a way that you're like, man, we should model that here. We should steal that model here in the States.
Yeah, I don't want to go too far into politics because I had to move my
Yeah.
company out of Mississippi because of privacy concerns for my clients.
Sure.
Like in the
Sure.
reproductive rights worlds. I mean, like
Yeah.
there's a lot of issues. Like
Yeah.
in the US, we're kind of going the other direction of like
Yeah.
judging this population. Yeah. I have more people praying for my soul than I know what to do with. Okay. Like, like, but you look at other countries, all right?
Sure.
Japan, about a third of their population is child free. They have no clue how to fix this. Like, like
Okay.
they're
Yeah.
looking at their population and going, we have a huge aging population and we don't have kids. Actually, what you're seeing, some areas do is they're actually starting to do programs to encourage people to have kids.
Oh, yeah.
There
That's
was
for
one
the
country,
unfunded. Yeah. For the unfunded
yeah,
liabilities, right? They have more
yep,
liabilities for like social welfare programs than they have future money coming in, right? So that's actually a
yep,
problem. Like in countries like Italy and Greece, I have a huge problem with that. Yeah.
yep. So I had somebody on a podcast say, well, but if you all child free folks don't have kids, Social Security is going to fall apart. I'm like, not my problem. Social Security's broken. Okay.
Right.
Like Social Security is based on constant growth. By the way, you can fix that with immigration, but that's a separate political issue.
Yeah.
But like, it's based on constant growth. And by the way, the environment can't take that. There's no reason. So I start pulling apart. And I've been doing this child free stuff for a couple of years now. And I get requests for financial planning from all around the world. Now, by the way, I can't actually serve them because I'm in the
Right.
US. I have one colleague looking to start a firm in UK. So I asked him, I'm like, so got any answers on this? And he's like, not really. Like, he's like,
Yeah.
same problems. I had somebody in India, interesting, we have a child free convention, August 1st, International Child Free Day, just in case anyone didn't know that. And we do a convention right around there. And they had a panel of somebody from India and somebody from Pakistan talking about child free in their community. And they have a very strong community that like you have multi generations in the house. Grandma lives there and
Yeah.
and the parents and well, the people that are child free are kicked out because they're not having kids to then keep this system going.
Right. Yeah.
And I was like, I didn't think of that. Like, it's these things that are built. I'll give you a silly example. Um, Culturally, so my wife and I went to get married, and she was raised Catholic, and she wanted to get married in the Catholic Church. Cool. I was raised Methodist, whatever it matters. Go to get married in Catholic Church. You have to do the pre-Cana, do all this,
Yeah.
meet with a priest. He says, "Hey, do you agree to raise your kids Catholic?" We said, "Yeah, no problem. We're not having kids. We can agree to raise them Catholic." He goes, "Oh no, you have to agree to have kids and raise them Catholic."
That's funny.
We couldn't get married in the Catholic Church 3 priests later, we got turned down. Like, nope, forget it. Like, this is what's going on. And when you say, hey, maybe other countries have figured this out. No, like we're all trying to figure this out because the answer is, go to Japan. They go, what do we do with our population? Got a huge aging population. What do we
Yeah.
do? Somebody publicly came out and said, "Oh, the elderly folks should commit seppuku and just off themselves to help fix the population." I'm like, "Hold up, like
What is
we
going
did
on?
not like," and that's the problem. I mean, my child-free folks, a lot of them would like to have a death with dignity option. We call it the opt out. Go to Switzerland, do their suicide pod, gone.
Yeah.
We don't have that in the U.S. Like, there's other ways we can do
Yeah.
this, but what's happening is the child-free issues are just like the open wound of the issues that are a symptom of everything else going on in the country or in other environments. Like, how do we handle aging folks? We get like Washington created a long term care policy, but that program you pay in for 10 years and you get $100 coverage for 1 year. So $36,000 of coverage when the average long term care costs $115,000
Yeah.
and women use 3.7 years of it. Like, you symptomatically said, "Oh, I did something." No, you didn't actually fix it.
Yeah.
You look, and this is where it becomes an issue. It just starts falling apart. And the problem is, I went to, I do a lot of press, and I was doing an interview. And if you talk to me in the press, I'm always going to ask, "Hey, do you want to talk about child free issues?" And I asked this person, he goes, I got to check with my editor. I'm like, why? He says, I don't think we can use the word child free in print. I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, it's like the word suicide. We weren't allowed to use that in print until recently because we're worried people are going to do it. And I'm like, are you, did you just say you're not allowed to use the word child free because you were like, this is the thought process that's going on.
That's wild.
So if they're like so much on the, hey, you got to have kids. And by the way, I don't care if you have kids or don't. It's not my choice. Like,
That's right.
you don't get a vote in my life. I don't get a vote in yours. But they're still fighting that battle. They're not going to solve the battle. Oh, well, then how do we actually help people who don't?
It's just an interesting thing to think about. Like just my brain's gonna be rattling around on this because these are the first times I'm ever actually legitimately having these deep level conversations about the concept and just thinking like, I'm glad people like you, Jay, are trying to solve this problem. I genuinely mean that. I like somebody's going to solve this challenge because, like, look, I've as I've said a couple of times, it affects people in my life that I care about. Like, I hope that there's good resources for them as they age and live their life child free. Let's close things out with just the scale of the opportunity here. Because first of all, I commend you for your generosity of coming on the show, right? Obviously, as I mentioned at the top of the show, our audience is financial advisors and wealth management executives. You are also a financial advisor and a wealth management executive at your own firm. So technically you're speaking to your community. This is like an industry presentation. So I always feel it's very generous of people to do that. What's the scale of the opportunity here as you see it for advisors to focus on child-free folks? And what would you say are the first steps for an advisor who either wants to focus exclusively on this or says, you know what, Jay's right. As I look at our business, we really need to carve out some specialization here to make sure we serve our child-free client population and future ones effectively.
Yeah. So let me use my numbers just because I understand that better. We're looking at our ideal client profile. We're saying, hey, we're targeting child free folks with $1 million of assets or more, kind of sweet spot being 1 to 5 million. There's about 4 million child free folks out there with $1 million assets or more. Okay. Our long term goal as a company, our like crazy goal is to serve 1% of those. That would mean we have 40,000 clients.
Wow.
That would make us one of the largest RIAs in the country.
Right.
But we'd still only serve 1% of the population.
Yeah.
Like, so in one side, it feels like a crazy number. The other side, you're like, I don't know that we move the needle. Okay. If I had my way, 100 other child free firms would open up. Why? Well, first of all, I get the first mover advantage and I get to say, hey, do you want the real one or, all the copies?
Yeah.
I'm joking, but it is somewhat true.
Sure. Why not?
But it's also, that's how big the need is. And what happens is, as firms, if you don't figure out how to serve child free folks, you're going to have to send them to me or someone else that's doing it. And people go, well, I can still figure it out. I'm like, you're not serving them well. I actually surveyed child free folks and asked, what was it like to work with a financial planner? And something like a third of the people I surveyed had worked with a financial planner, and it was all pretty bad. I mean, there were some nice ones, but like most of it was. And what they do is they say, like, oh, well, I went to the financial planner, told them they're child free, and they said, oh, you'll change your mind. Now, by the way, if you want something not to say to a child free person, say never say you'll change your mind. Okay, like that's like as bad as you get.
Yeah.
Okay, you know. So, or they say, oh, your plan is exactly the same as everybody else. No, it's not. If you're cookie cuttering it, it's not going to work. I had others. So I did this Kitsis article talking about or child free by choice, whatever. They're like, well, I think I need to understand why they chose to be child free. I'm like, no, you don't. It's none of your damn business. Like
Yeah.
asking somebody like, why isn't working? And it's all these assumptions. Well, the thing is, to firms out there, you are probably inadvertently hurting people or having your own bias against them when
Yeah.
instead you could be serving them. And that's a challenge. Now, for those that are on the 1% AUM model, I don't know how you solve the die with zero problem plus the 1% model. Because the problem is, if you're going to plan on your clients always the net worth going down, and people go, well, retirees spend some of their money. I'm like, yes, you're right. But I'm talking about like they got 10 million now, going to die with zero. How do you build that into your business plan? And I
Yeah.
think the answer is you might not be able to.
Right.
That's where flat fee services or subscription or some of those other models work. My expectation is that at some point, some large firm is going to go, holy crap, I need to deal with these people. Fidelity did a study on the soloists, and they found that being single with no kids or just being single is somewhere between $400,000 and $1 million of single tax across your life. Like that's a giant problem. And they outlined up some of these end of life problems, but they didn't have any solutions.
Yeah.
I'm like, at some point, some of these big companies go, wow, that's a quarter of our population we're not serving. I met with an insurance company and I said, hey, I need a product so they can die with zero, long-term care. And it was C-level officer. And they're like, why is nobody doing this? I'm like, I don't know. Like, why is there, I
Yeah.
was in a mastermind group and they're talking about most planners are living in a red ocean. They're stealing from each other. And I
Yep.
explained
They
what
are.
I'm doing. They're going, you're in a blue ocean. I'm like, yes, I am. I'm in a blue ocean. I am not stealing from other financial planners. My clients, I don't know, maybe a third of them have ever had a financial planner. And usually it's like dad's financial planner that's misserving them, and I I've got all these clients going, please help us.
Yeah.
We just started this month. We started charging for our intro meetings. So we do what's called child free wealth checkup. We do a whole analysis. It's kind of like when you go to your oil change, you like says like you got to do your windshield wipers, you got to do your tires. We do that. We charge $500 for our intro meeting. So we've now been running it for 24 days. We've had 7 people sign up and pay. How many other firms can tell you that they're getting paid to do intro meetings
Yeah.
to clients?
Yeah. I love that you mentioned that most advisors are living in a red ocean because it's so true. I mean, the organic growth numbers in this industry are frighteningly bad, right? Most advisors, in fact, 40% of financial advisors are their business is negative net redemption, like said others. So they're negative outflows, excuse me, for their AUM. It's because they're not growing their business organically, right? They've relied on market growth. It's like 75% of all growth for financial advisors has been market growth driven. So they're getting a little, once they build their business to like whatever they feel is sustainable, they just live off the fat of that business and occasional referrals come in. So what you're saying is 100% correct. This is not just an opportunity to serve your existing clients better. This is an opportunity to create a growth engine for your business, right? To focus on a segment of the population who desperately needs to be served better or is not being served at all with appropriate advice and guidance. And it could be a growth engine for your business. This has been awesome, Jay. So people are going to want to follow up with you. We're going to go send them to childfreewealth.com. Where else can people learn more about you, the child free wealth stuff you're doing? Lay it on me.
Yep. Child free wealth on all the socials except for Twitter because he says childless folks should not have a vote. That's actually an honest truth. Like seriously. Remember, if you're going to serve child free folks, it comes with judgments.
But judgments can go both ways, right? Yeah, exactly.
Right. And then new book coming out is the Child Free Guide to Life and Money, up for pre-sale now, coming out December 30th first. If you want to like get the cheat sheet on how to actually do this, that's there. Connect me on LinkedIn, whatever you want.
Thank you very much. This has been great. Fantastic. Glad you came on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for listening to and or watching this episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. It's always fantastic to have you with us. Huge props to my man, Jay Zigmont from Childfree Wealth for coming on the show and being so generous with his insights and kind of the roadmap for the firm that he's building. That takes a lot, right? To give back to the community in that way. And you can tell he's on a mission to make sure child-free folks are served better. So whether you choose to serve your child-free clients a little bit better or focus a little more on that and maybe have an entire vertical in your business doing that, awesome stuff from Jay. I hope it helps you and your business, and frankly, hope it helps your child-free clients. They need help too. All right, that's all I have for you today. As I mentioned at the top of the show, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform and be nice to each other. We'll see you next time on the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. See ya. Bye.